The Mitchells had always been the kind of family that neighbors envied. Their two-story colonial in Oak Ridge, Connecticut was impeccably maintained, with seasonal wreaths adorning the front door and carefully pruned hydrangeas lining the walkway. Thomas Mitchell, a respected investment banker, and his wife Eleanor, who taught English at the local high school, had raised two children who seemed equally accomplished. Their daughter Abigail was finishing her second year of law school at Boston University, while their son Ryan had just graduated from high school with a full scholarship to Cornell. On the third Sunday of May, they gathered for their monthly family dinner, a tradition that had survived busy schedules and teenage rebellion. The dining room table was set with Eleanor's grandmother's china, steam rising from the pot roast at its center. Thomas poured red wine into crystal glasses while Eleanor arranged roasted vegetables on a serving platter. "Ryan, could you call your sister down? The food's getting cold," Eleanor said, wiping her hands on her apron. Ryan scrolled through his phone, barely looking up. "She knows we eat at 6. Thomas shot his son a warning look. "Just go get her, please." With a dramatic sigh that only 18-year-olds can perfect, Ryan pushed back from the table and trudged upstairs. The sound of his knuckles rapping against wood echoed down the stairwell. "Abs, dinner's ready." A pause. "Abby." Eleanor and Thomas exchanged glances when Ryan came bounding back down the stairs alone. "She's not there. Her car's gone too." Eleanor frowned, reaching for her phone. "That's strange. She texted an hour ago saying she was studying in her room." The family began dinner without Abigail, conversation stilted and punctuated by the scraping of silverware against plates. When the front door finally opened at 7:30, all three heads turned toward the entryway. Abigail appeared, cheeks flushed and hair windblown. "Sorry I'm late." "Where were you?" Thomas asked, setting down his fork. "Just had to run an errand." "Can I fix a plate?" Eleanor studied her daughter's face. 24 years of motherhood had given her a sixth sense. "You weren't running an errand, were you?" Abigail's shoulders sagged as she sank into her chair. She looked at each family member before fixing her gaze on the centerpiece. "I was at Grandpa's." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thomas's jaw tightened. "My father? Why would you go see him?" "Because he's sick, Dad. He has cancer, and he's been trying to reach you for weeks." Thomas stood abruptly, his napkin falling to the floor. "We're not discussing this." "We have to," Abigail insisted. "He's dying." "Good," Thomas said, the word hanging in the air like a slap. Eleanor reached for her husband's arm. "Thomas, please, no. You know what he did. You know why we haven't spoken in 15 years. He turned to his daughter. "And you went behind my back?" Abigail's voice wobbled but held firm. "He's my grandfather. I have a right to know him." "You have no idea what you're talking about," Thomas said. "That man destroyed everything my mother built. He gambled away her inheritance, remortgaged the house without telling her, and disappeared when creditors came calling. I was 19, just like Ryan. I had to drop out of college to support her." "He told me his side of the story," Abigail said quietly. Thomas laughed bitterly. "I'm sure he did. He's always been good at convincing people he's the victim." Ryan, who had been silently watching the exchange, finally spoke. "Is that why you pushed me so hard about financial responsibility? Why you made me work since I was 15, even though we didn't need the money?" "We always need the money," Thomas said automatically. "Security isn't guaranteed." Eleanor placed her hand over her husband's. "Maybe it's time the kids knew everything, Thomas. They're not children anymore." Thomas's face had gone pale, the lines around his mouth deepening. "My father isn't who you think he is. He's charming, and he knows exactly what to say to make you trust him. But he destroys everything he touches." "He's changed," Abigail insisted. "He's been sober for 12 years. People like him don't change," Thomas said, his voice hollow. "They just find new ways to hurt you." Ryan pushed his plate away. "So you're just going to let him die alone? Without even hearing him out? You don't know what you're asking." Thomas's hands trembled slightly. "There are things you don't understand." Abigail stood, matching her father's stance. "Then help us understand. Because right now, all I see is a stubborn man refusing to forgive a dying father who's begging for a chance to make amends." "Don't you dare judge me," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You have no idea what it took to build this life after what he did. The sacrifice is your mother, and I made to make sure you never had to worry about anything." "Maybe that was the problem," Abigail shot back. "Maybe we should have worried more. Maybe we should have known that our perfect family was built on a foundation of lies and resentment. Eleanor stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough, both of you. But Thomas was already walking out of the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. The sound of a door slamming upstairs made the chandelier tremble slightly. Eleanor sighed, looking between her children. Your father has his reasons. More than you know. Then why won't he tell us? Ryan asked. Some wounds run too deep, Eleanor said, gathering plates from the table. Some betrayals never heal. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. Grandpa is dying, Mom. He has weeks, maybe months. Dad doesn't have the luxury of time to hold on to his anger. It's not anger, Eleanor said softly. It's fear. Fear that forgiving your grandfather means admitting that 15 years of separation was a waste. Fear that you'll love the man who nearly destroyed him. The three of them sat in silence as night fell outside the windows, the family dinner tradition broken perhaps beyond repair. The following week unfolded in a series of tense silences and closed doors. The Mitchell household, once warm and inviting, now felt like a battleground where each family member carefully navigated to avoid confrontation. Ryan found his sister in the kitchen early Saturday morning, nursing a cup of coffee and staring blankly at her laptop screen. The digital clock on the microwave read 6:23 a.m. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, opening the refrigerator. Abigail shook her head. I keep thinking about Grandpa Richard. I visited him again yesterday. Ryan poured orange juice into a glass and leaned against the counter. How is he? Not good. Abigail closed her laptop. The doctors say the cancer has spread to his liver. He's in a lot of pain, but he tries to hide it. She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. He asked about Dad again. What did you tell him? The truth. That Dad's still processing everything. She sighed. But I'm running out of gentle ways to say Dad refuses to see him. The sound of footsteps on the stairs silenced them both. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day in jeans and a light sweater. You're both up early, she observed, heading for the coffee maker. Mom, Ryan ventured. Have you talked to Dad about Grandpa? Eleanor's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. Your father and I have discussed it, yes. And Abigail pressed. And it's complicated. Eleanor turned to face her children, her expression weary. Your grandfather hurt a lot of people, not just your dad. There's Barbara, your grandmother's sister, who lent them money they never saw again. There's your grandmother herself, who died believing her husband had abandoned her for another woman, never knowing he was gambling away everything they had. But that was decades ago, Abigail argued. People make mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary or saying something hurtful in anger, Eleanor replied. What Richard did was systematic deception over years. He lied to your grandmother every day. He forged her signature on loan documents. He left your father to clean up a mess he couldn't possibly handle alone. Ryan set his glass down with more force than necessary. So we just let him die alone as punishment? What does that say about us? That's not fair, Ryan, Eleanor said. Your father has suffered too. The weekend shifts at the gas station while trying to finish high school. The loans he's still paying off. The therapy he needed to trust anyone again, including me. I understand all that, Abigail said. But I've spent time with Grandpa. He's not the monster Dad makes him out to be. He's just a flawed man who made terrible choices and has spent years trying to make amends. Eleanor's expression softened. I believe you. But forgiveness can't be forced, and it can't be rushed. It has to come naturally, if it comes at all. If, Ryan echoed. So Dad might just never forgive him? Even when he's dying. That's your father's choice to make, Eleanor said. And we have to respect it, even if we don't agree. Later that day, Thomas emerged from his home office where he'd been holed up since breakfast. He found Ryan in the backyard, aggressively mowing the lawn in precise lines. You missed a spot, Thomas called out, attempting normality. Ryan cut the engine, wiping sweat from his forehead. I was going to come back for it. Thomas nodded, hands in his pockets. An awkward silence stretched between them. Your mother tells me you have questions, Thomas finally said. Ryan shrugged. Would it matter if I did? You've made up your mind. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Dad. Ryan kicked at a clump of grass. Not to Grandpa. Not to us. Not even to you. Thomas sighed heavily. Come inside. If we're going to have this conversation, I need a drink. In the kitchen, Thomas poured 2 glasses of scotch, sliding one toward his son. "Don't tell your mother," he said with a weak smile. Ryan took a small sip, grimacing at the burn. "I went with Abby to see him yesterday." Thomas's knuckles whitened around his glass. "I see. He has all these pictures of us, Dad. School photos, newspaper clippings of my soccer tournaments, Abby's debate team wins. He kept track of everything." From a distance, Thomas said bitterly, "That's always been his way. Present when it's easy, absent when it matters." Ryan studied his father's face. "He's not asking for your money or even your forgiveness. He just wants to see you before he dies. You don't understand what you're asking of me." "Then explain it." Ryan's voice rose. "Because from where I'm standing, you're the one choosing to let bitterness win." Thomas drained his glass. "When your grandfather left, I begged him to stay. I promised I would help fix things, work extra jobs, anything. You know what he said?" Thomas's voice cracked slightly. "He said I wasn't enough. That my help was worthless." Ryan's anger deflated. "Dad, he left the next day? No goodbye, no forwarding address. The bank foreclosed 2 months later. I lived in my car until your Aunt Barbara finally took me in." Upstairs, Abigail was on the phone with her grandfather's nurse, speaking in hushed tones. "How much longer does he have?" She listened, eyes closing briefly. "I understand. Thank you for everything you're doing." She ended the call just as her mother appeared in the doorway. "How is he?" Eleanor asked. "Refusing morphine because it makes him too groggy. He wants to be alert in case." Abigail didn't finish the sentence. They both knew. Eleanor sat beside her daughter on the bed. "Your father found the hospital bills in the mail." Abigail's head snapped up. "I can explain. He already knows you've been helping pay for Richard's care. He's not angry, just surprised." Abigail twisted her hands in her lap. "I couldn't let him suffer, Mom. The insurance doesn't cover everything, and the experimental treatment was his only chance. $30,000 is a lot of money, Abby. Your law school fund. I can take out loans like everyone else." Abigail's chin lifted defiantly. "I made my choice." Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Your grandfather doesn't deserve your sacrifice." "Maybe not. But I'm not doing it for him, not really. I'm doing it because it's who I want to be, someone who helps, not hurts. Someone who forgives." Eleanor pulled her daughter into a hug. "You're a better person than most of us." Downstairs, the conversation between father and son had reached an impasse. "So that's it?" Ryan asked. "You won't even consider seeing him?" "I didn't say that," Thomas replied, his voice tired. "I said I need time." "He doesn't have time, Dad. That's the whole point." Thomas ran a hand through his graying hair. "Do you know why I pushed you so hard about money? Why I made you work and save and understand the value of everything?" Ryan waited silently. "Because financial irresponsibility isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about trust. Your grandfather didn't just lose money. He betrayed my mother's trust in the most fundamental way. He made promises he never intended to keep." "People change," Ryan insisted. "Sometimes," Thomas conceded. "But how do you know if the change is real or just another performance?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on Wednesday. Thomas fumbled for his phone in the darkness, Eleanor stirring beside him. "Hello." His voice was thick with sleep. Then, instantly alert. "What? When?" Eleanor switched on the bedside lamp, watching her husband's face transform as he listened. "Yes, I understand. We'll be there soon." Thomas ended the call and sat motionless on the edge of the bed. "Thomas." Eleanor touched his shoulder gently. "What's happened?" "My father." He spoke as if the words were foreign to him. "He's taken a turn. They don't think he'll make it through the night." Eleanor was already getting up, reaching for clothes. "I'll wake the kids." Thomas caught her wrist. "I don't know if I can do this." She knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "You don't have to forgive him. You just have to be there. If not for him, then for Abigail and Ryan. For yourself." 20 minutes later, the Mitchell family drove through deserted streets towards St. Mary's Hospital. No one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers against a light rain. In the back seat, Ryan reached for his sister's hand. Abigail squeezed back, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. In the rearview mirror, Thomas caught this exchange, something shifting in his chest at the sight of his children united in grief over a man they barely knew. The hospital corridor was harshly lit, the antiseptic smell cutting through the emotional fog. A nurse met them outside room 412, her expression composed but grim. Family of Richard Mitchell? Thomas nodded stiffly. He's been asking for you, she said to Thomas. He's conscious, but very weak. The doctor can explain his condition, but… She hesitated. If there are things that need to be said, now is the time. Thomas stood frozen until Eleanor nudged him forward. We'll wait here, she said, gesturing to the nearby chairs where Abigail and Ryan were already seated. Inside the room, machines beeped softly. Richard Mitchell looked nothing like the towering figure of Thomas's childhood memories. This man was diminished, skin stretched thin over bones, oxygen tubes threaded beneath his nose. His eyes were closed, but they fluttered open at the sound of footsteps. Tommy. The voice was a rasp. Is that really you? Thomas stood at the foot of the bed, hands gripping the rail. I'm here. A smile transformed the dying man's face. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I, Thomas admitted. He moved closer, taking in the details of his father's appearance. The once strong hands now spotted with age, the hair, what was left of it, completely white. You look good, son, Richard said. Distinguished. Like your mother's father. Thomas felt the familiar anger stir at the mention of his mother. Don't. Richard nodded weakly. Fair enough. He gestured toward the chair beside the bed. Will you sit? Just for a minute. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas lowered himself into the chair, maintaining distance. Abigail tells me you've been sober for years. 12 years, for months, and 17 days. Richard's smile was sad. Too late for many things, but I did it anyway. Why now? Thomas couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Why reach out when you're dying? Is this about easing your conscience before you go? Richard closed his eyes briefly. I've tried before. Letters, phone calls. I respected your silence. But yes, facing death changes your priorities. He coughed, the sound wet and painful. I don't expect forgiveness, Tommy. I don't deserve it. I just needed to see you once more and tell you I'm sorry. Truly sorry for everything. Thomas felt something crack inside him. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Sorry doesn't give my mother back the years she spent waiting for you to come home, believing you'd abandoned her for another woman rather than knowing the truth, that you gambled away everything she loved. I know. Richard's voice was barely audible. I failed her. I failed you. You did more than fail us. You destroyed us. Thomas leaned forward, words he'd held back for 15 years spilling out. Do you know what it was like for me? 19 years old. Watching mom waste away from grief while I worked 3 jobs to keep the lights on? Dropping out of college to pay off your debts? Having collection agencies hounding us for years? Richard nodded, tears tracking down his sunken cheeks. I was sick, Tommy. The gambling, the drinking, they were diseases I didn't know how to fight. It's not an excuse, just the truth. A convenient truth, Thomas scoffed. There's something you don't know, Richard said after a moment. Something I've never told anyone. Thomas waited, skepticism evident in his expression. Your mother knew more than you think. Richard's breathing was becoming labored. About the gambling. Not everything, but enough. She tried to help me. Took me to meetings, therapists. I promised her so many times that I'd stop. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. She would have told me. She was protecting you. She didn't want you to think less of me. Richard reached weakly for Thomas's hand. Thomas didn't take it. The night I left, after the bank called about the second mortgage, she told me not to come back until I'd gotten help. Said she couldn't watch me destroy myself anymore. His voice broke. I was too ashamed to get that help. Too weak. By the time I finally did, years later, she was gone. Thomas sat very still, recalibrating a lifetime of memories. If that's true, why didn't you come back after her funeral? I reached out to every relative trying to find you. Because you were building a life without my chaos, Richard said simply. College again, meeting Eleanor. I saw you at graduation, you know. Stood in the back. You were there? Thomas felt as though the ground beneath him had shifted. I've been there more than you know. Always at a distance, where I couldn't hurt you again. Outside the room, Abigail paced the corridor while Ryan stared blankly at a vending machine. What do you think they're saying? Ryan asked. Abigail shook her head. I don't know, but at least they're talking. Eleanor approached with 3 coffee cups balanced precariously in her hands. Any news? Dad's still in there, Ryan said, taking one of the cups. Thanks, Mom. Eleanor settled into a chair, exhaustion etched across her face. You know, when I first met your father, He never spoke about his parents. I thought maybe they had died when he was young. It wasn't until we got engaged that he told me about your grandfather. Abigail sat beside her mother. What did he say? That Richard Mitchell was a good man who made bad choices, and that he loved him but could never trust him again. Eleanor's gaze drifted to the closed door of room 412. Your father has spent his entire adult life trying to be the opposite of his father, reliable, honest, present. Sometimes too present, Ryan muttered. Eleanor smiled slightly. He hovers because he knows what it's like when a parent isn't there at all. Inside the hospital room, the conversation had reached the heart of the matter. I have something for you, Richard said, gesturing weakly toward the small table beside his bed. In the drawer. Thomas hesitated, then slid open the drawer to find a worn leather journal. I started writing to you in rehab, Richard explained. Things I was too cowardly to say in person. Later, I wrote about your mother, about the good years before I ruined everything. I thought you might want to know that part of our story too. Thomas held the journal without opening it. I also left something for the kids, Richard continued. Not money, I know better than that. Just some memories, photos I collected over the years. Things I want them to have of their heritage, the good parts. A nurse appeared in the doorway. I need to check his vitals. Thomas stood, clutching the journal. I should let you rest. Tommy, Richard's voice was fading. Thank you for coming. It means everything. In the hallway, Thomas found his family waiting. Abigail immediately stood. How is he? She asked anxiously. Thomas ran a hand over his face. Not good. The nurse is with him now. He turned to Eleanor. Could you and Ryan give us a minute? When they were alone, Thomas handed Abigail the journal. He kept this. Letters to me he never sent. I can't read them right now. Abigail took the book carefully. Do you want me to read them for you? Tell you what they say? Thomas nodded, suddenly exhausted. Please. He sank into a chair, looking older than Abigail had ever seen him. There's something else. Mom knew about his gambling. She tried to help him for years before she finally told him to leave. That changes things, Abigail said quietly. It changes everything and nothing. Thomas looked up at his daughter. The pain he caused was real. The damage he did was real. But what? But maybe he really did try to change. Maybe he stayed away because he thought it was better for us. Thomas's voice caught. I don't know if I can forgive him, Abby, but I can try to understand him. The nurse emerged from the room, approaching them with a solemn expression. Mr. Mitchell, your father is asking for everyone now. He's very weak. Thomas stood, reaching for his daughter's hand. Let's get your mother and brother. It's time we face this as a family. As they walked toward Eleanor and Ryan, Thomas felt the weight of 15 years of anger and resentment. It hadn't disappeared, but somehow it seemed lighter now, as if sharing the burden had diminished its power. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, broken but not beaten, a family finding its way back to wholeness through the painful truth. The Mitchell family entered room 412 together, an unconscious united front. The beeping of machines seemed louder now, more urgent. Richard's eyes were closed, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. The night nurse had dimmed the lights, casting the room in a gentle glow that softened the harsh reality of the hospital setting. Grandpa, Abigail approached the bed first, taking Richard's frail hand in hers. We're all here now. Richard's eyes fluttered open, taking a moment to focus. A smile transformed his gaunt face when he saw the four of them standing there. My family, he whispered, the words barely audible above the mechanical hum. Ryan moved to the opposite side of the bed, surprising everyone by leaning down to kiss his grandfather's forehead. Hey, Gramps. Thomas and Eleanor remained at the foot of the bed, Thomas's hand gripping the rail so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Eleanor placed her hand over his, a silent gesture of support. I never thought I'd see you all together, Richard said, his voice stronger than before, as if the sight of his family had temporarily revitalized him. Don't try to talk too much, Abigail cautioned, reaching for the cup of water on the bedside table. She held the straw to his lips, allowing him a small sip. Richard's gaze fixed on Thomas. Your children are extraordinary, Tommy. You did what I couldn't. Thomas swallowed hard, nodding once in acknowledgement. The compliment landed somewhere between gratitude and grief. Mom, Ryan said suddenly, you should sit with Grandpa too. He moved aside, offering his place by the bed. Eleanor hesitated, glancing at Thomas. When he gave a subtle nod, she moved forward and sat in the chair Ryan had vacated. "Eleanor," Richard said, reaching for her hand with trembling fingers. "Thank you for giving my son the love he deserves. For healing what I broke." Eleanor took his hand, her initial reluctance melting away at the sincerity in his voice. "Thomas is the strongest person I know. He made his own path. With you beside him," Richard insisted. A sudden spasm of pain crossed his face, causing him to wince. Abigail looked anxiously at the monitors. "Should I call the nurse?" Richard shook his head. "No, I've refused more medication. I want to be present for this." Thomas finally spoke, his voice rougher than usual. "That's foolish. You're in pain." "Some pain is necessary," Richard replied. "Some pain reminds us we're still alive." His gaze traveled around the room, taking in each face as if memorizing them. "I have something to ask of each of you. My last requests, if you'll humor a dying man." The family exchanged glances, but no one objected. "Abigail," Richard began, "in my apartment, there's a box in the closet. Letters from your grandmother she wrote while we were courting. I want you to have them. She was brilliant, like you. She would have been so proud of the woman you've become." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "I'll find them," she promised. Richard turned to Ryan next. "For you, my chess set. Your father and I used to play every Sunday after church. Did he ever tell you that?" Ryan looked at his father in surprise. Thomas gave a small nod, the memory visibly affecting him. "And there's an envelope for you in my safety deposit box," Richard continued. "Your college fund. Not much, just what I could save from my pension, but it might help with books or expenses." "Grandpa, you didn't have to," Ryan began. "I wanted to," Richard interrupted gently. "It mattered to me to contribute something positive to your future." He coughed then, the sound rattling deep in his chest. Abigail quickly offered more water, but he waved it away. "Eleanor," he said when the coughing subsided, "there's nothing material I can offer you. Just my gratitude. And perhaps a piece of advice from someone who learned too late. Treasure every ordinary moment. The coffee in the morning, the conversations about nothing important, the quiet evenings. Those are the threads that weave a life together." Eleanor nodded, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Finally, Richard turned to his son. "Thomas," he began, voice faltering, "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I hope someday, when you think of me, you might remember the father who taught you to ride a bike and build model airplanes. The man I was before I lost my way." Thomas moved closer to the bed, his expression unreadable. "I remember that man," he said quietly. "In my wallet," Richard continued, gesturing weakly toward the drawer where his personal effects were stored. "There's a photo. You and me at Rockport Beach. You were maybe 7. Your mother took it." Ryan retrieved the wallet, opening it to find the photograph. A much younger Thomas on his father's shoulders, both of them laughing against a backdrop of ocean and sky. He handed it silently to his father. Thomas stared at the image for a long moment. "I remember this day," he said finally. "You bought me cotton candy, and Mom said it would rot my teeth." Richard smiled, the memory clearly precious to him. "You ate it anyway, then threw up on the car ride home." A ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's face. "You never told Mom it was the cotton candy. Said it must have been bad hot dogs." "We had our secrets," Richard said softly. The room fell quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines. Richard's breathing had become more labored, each inhale a visible effort. "I should have tried harder," he said suddenly, his voice urgent. "Should have been stronger for you and your mother." Thomas's composure finally cracked. "Why weren't you?" The question contained decades of pain. "Fear," Richard answered simply. "Fear of failing. Fear of not being the man you both needed. So I ran from that fear into bigger mistakes, and then I was too ashamed to come back. I needed my father," Thomas said, the words wrenched from somewhere deep inside him. "I was 19 and terrified, and I needed you." "I know," Richard whispered, "and I will regret that until my last breath." His eyes closed briefly, his strength visibly waning. "Which may not be far off now." Abigail let out a small sob, quickly stifled with her hand. Ryan moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Can I ask one more thing of you all?" Richard's voice had diminished to barely a whisper. "Anything," Abigail answered immediately. "Stay with me? Just until." Thomas answered for all of them. "We're not going anywhere." The night deepened outside the hospital windows. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting medication. The family remained, sometimes speaking in soft voices about memories both painful and precious, sometimes sitting in silence that gradually became less strained. Near dawn, Richard's breathing changed, becoming more irregular. The nurse warned them that the end was approaching. Abigail held one of her grandfather's hands, Ryan the other. Eleanor stood behind her children, a steady presence offering silent support. Thomas moved his chair closer to the head of the bed. After a moment's hesitation, he placed his hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad?" he said quietly, using the term for the first time that night. "I'm here. We're all here." Richard's eyes opened one last time, finding his son's face. No words came, but something passed between them. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The beginning of peace. As the first light of morning filtered through the blinds, Richard Mitchell took his final breath, surrounded by the family he had lost and found again. The day after Richard's death dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn morning that felt almost insulting in its beauty. The Mitchell family moved through the house like sleepwalkers, exhausted from the night's vigil. Thomas spent most of the morning making phone calls, to the funeral home, to distant relatives, to his boss explaining his need for bereavement leave. Each call was businesslike, practical, his emotions locked safely away behind logistics. Eleanor made breakfast that no one ate, then lunch that met the same fate. Ryan retreated to his room with his headphones, while Abigail sat at the kitchen table, methodically going through Richard's journal, marking pages with colored sticky notes. By mid-afternoon, Thomas had run out of calls to make. He found himself standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching his daughter. "Anything important in there?" he asked, nodding toward the journal. Abigail looked up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "All of it's important, Dad. It's his whole life." Thomas pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. "Tell me." Abigail hesitated, then pushed the journal toward him. "I think you should read it yourself." "I will," Thomas promised. "But right now, I'd like to hear it from you." She nodded, understanding what he couldn't quite say, that he needed a buffer, someone to process the raw emotion before he faced it directly. "It starts when he was in rehab the first time, about a year after he left," she began. "Most of the early entries are apologies. To Grandma, to you, to himself even." She flipped to a marked page. "Here, he writes about the day you were born. How terrified he was of being responsible for another life when he could barely manage his own." Thomas's expression remained neutral, but his hands tightened around his coffee mug. "There are gaps," Abigail continued. "Sometimes months or years between entries. Those were his relapses, I think. But he always came back to writing." She turned to another marked section. "This part is about your wedding day. He watched from his car across the street. Said you looked happier than he'd ever seen you. And he knew Eleanor was the reason." "I never saw him," Thomas said quietly. "He didn't want you to. He writes that he was afraid his presence would cast a shadow over your happiness." Abigail paused, tracing a finger over a line of text. "There's a lot about Grandma, too. How they met at a dance in 1968. Their first apartment in Hartford. The Christmas she surprised him with tickets to a Yankees game." Thomas's eyes closed briefly. "She saved for months for those tickets. We sat right behind the dugout." Abigail nodded. "He remembers that, too. Says it was the best day of his life." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway. "It's Barbara," she said softly. Thomas straightened, surprise evident on his face. "My aunt is here." Eleanor nodded. "She heard about Richard. Said she needed to see you." In the living room, Barbara Mitchell Davis sat, perched on the edge of the sofa, looking every bit the formidable family matriarch. At 72, she remained striking, silver hair cut in a precise bob, posture perfect, eyes sharp behind designer frames. She stood when Thomas entered. "Tommy," she said, opening her arms. Despite their height difference, there was something childlike in the way Thomas folded himself into her embrace. "I didn't expect you," he said when they separated. "I was going to call once the arrangements were finalized." "Some news needs to be received in person," Barbara replied, settling back onto the sofa. She nodded at Abigail and Eleanor, who had followed Thomas into the room. "Hello, girls. You both look exhausted. Why don't you rest a bit while Thomas and I talk?" It wasn't really a suggestion. Eleanor touched Abigail's arm, and they retreated upstairs, leaving aunt and nephew alone. "So Richard is gone," Barbara said once they were alone, her tone matter of fact. How are you feeling about that? Thomas ran a hand through his hair. I don't know. Relieved. Angry. Sad. All of it, and none of it. Barbara nodded as if he'd confirmed something she already knew. Did you get to say what you needed to say? Some of it, Thomas admitted. Not all. That's generally how these things go. Barbara reached into her handbag, retrieving an envelope. I have something for you. Richard gave it to me years ago, made me promise to give it to you when he was gone. Thomas accepted the envelope with visible reluctance. What is it? Open it and see, she said simply. Inside was a collection of documents, bank statements, legal papers, a deed. Thomas frowned as he scanned them. I don't understand. This is Mom's life insurance policy, the one that supposedly paid out to Dad when she died. Barbara's expression remained neutral. Keep looking. Thomas shuffled through the papers until he found a bank transfer record. His eyes widened as he read it. He transferred the entire amount to a trust in my name? Thomas looked up, bewildered. But I never saw this money. We lost the house. I had to drop out of school. Because he never told you about it, Barbara said. Your mother's policy paid out $200,000. Richard put every penny into that trust, with strict instructions that it could only be accessed when you turned 30 or in case of catastrophic illness or injury. Thomas stared at the documents in disbelief. Why would he do that? Why let me struggle if the money was there all along? Barbara sighed, her composed facade cracking slightly to reveal the weight of long-kept secrets. Because he knew himself, Tommy knew that if he had access to that money, he would have gambled it away within months. This way, it would be there for you when he couldn't be. But why not tell me? I lived in my car for weeks. I ate at soup kitchens. Pride, maybe. Shame. Or perhaps he thought you'd try to give it back to him if you knew. Barbara leaned forward, clasping her hands together. Your father was a deeply flawed man, Thomas. He made terrible choices that hurt everyone who loved him. But in his own broken way, he tried to protect you from the worst of himself. Thomas stood abruptly, pacing the room. So what happened to this trust? Where's the money now? It matured on your 30th birthday, as planned. Richard had the bank send notice to your last known address, but by then you had moved and left no forwarding information. Barbara removed her glasses, cleaning them methodically with a handkerchief. The money sat unclaimed for years. Richard finally had it transferred to a college fund for your children. That's what Ryan is inheriting. Thomas stopped pacing, the implications sinking in. So all this time, your father was doing the one good thing he knew how to do, protecting his family's future from his own worst impulses. Barbara replaced her glasses. I'm not asking you to forgive him, Thomas. What he did to your mother, to you, it was unforgivable in many ways. I'm just asking you to understand that people are rarely all good or all bad. We're just broken creatures doing our best with the pieces we have left. Upstairs, Ryan sat on the floor of his childhood bedroom, surrounded by cardboard boxes from the attic. When Abigail passed by, he called her in. Look at this, he said, holding up a dusty envelope. Abigail sat cross-legged beside him. What is it? Dad's college acceptance letters. All of them. Ryan spread them out on the floor. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Stanford. Did you know Dad got into all these schools? Abigail shook her head, picking up the Harvard letter. This is dated the year Grandpa left. Exactly, Ryan said. He never got to go to any of them. Ended up at community college while working full-time, then transferred to UConn later. Abigail's brow furrowed. Why would Dad keep these? It's just a reminder of what he lost. Or maybe it's a reminder of what he overcame, Ryan suggested. I've been thinking about what Mom said, about how Dad spent his life trying to be the opposite of Grandpa. These letters aren't just about the opportunities he lost. They're proof that he was always capable of greatness. That no matter what Grandpa did, it couldn't take that away from him. Abigail leaned back against the bed, considering her brother's words. You're pretty insightful for a teenager. I have my moments, Ryan said with a half smile. Hey, do you think Dad ever told Grandpa about these? About what he gave up? I don't know, Abigail admitted. But if he didn't, maybe he should have. Maybe Grandpa needed to understand exactly what his actions cost. Downstairs, Thomas and Barbara had moved to the kitchen. Eleanor had joined them, brewing a fresh pot of coffee while Thomas explained about the trust and the college fund. So Richard was paying for the children's education all along, Eleanor said, setting mugs on the table. No wonder he never wanted any financial help from us. Barbara nodded. He was determined to contribute something positive to their lives. It was his way of making amends, I suppose. Thomas stared into his coffee. $200,000 doesn't erase what he did. Of course not, Barbara agreed. Nothing could. But it's not about erasing the past, Tommy. It's about creating a different future. Isn't that what you've done with your own life? With your family? Thomas had no answer for that. The three of them sat in contemplative silence until Ryan appeared in the doorway, Abigail right behind him. Dad, Ryan said, holding out the college acceptance letters. We found these in the attic. Thomas's face softened at the sight of the weathered envelopes. I'd forgotten those were up there. You got into Harvard, Ryan said, something like awe in his voice. And Yale. A lifetime ago, Thomas said with a sad smile. Abigail moved further into the kitchen. Did Grandpa know about these schools? Thomas nodded slowly. He was the one who encouraged me to apply, paid for the application fees, helped me with the essays. His voice grew distant with memory. He was so proud when the acceptance letters came. Started calling me his Harvard man weeks before I even decided where to go. Barbara made a soft sound of recognition. I remember that. He bragged to everyone at church about it. And then he left, Thomas said, the words falling like stones. And Harvard became just another casualty. The room grew quiet, each person absorbing the weight of what might have been. Finally, Abigail broke the silence. I think I understand him better now, she said. Not just Grandpa, but you too, Dad. Why you pushed us so hard about college, about stability. I never wanted you to experience that kind of loss, Thomas admitted. To have your future stolen from you. Ryan approached the table, placing the letters in front of his father. But your future wasn't stolen, Dad. It was just redirected. And look what you built instead. Thomas looked around the kitchen at his family, his wise, compassionate daughter, his thoughtful, perceptive son, his steadfast, loving wife, even his formidable aunt who had kept faith with a broken brother all these years. In their faces, he saw reflections of his own journey, not the one he had planned, but the one that had brought him here, to this moment of painful clarity and unexpected grace. Richard Mitchell's funeral was held on a Thursday afternoon at St. Joseph's Catholic Church, where he had apparently been attending services for the past decade. Thomas was surprised by the turnout. Nearly 100 people filled the pews, faces he didn't recognize, but who clearly knew his father. An older woman with a cane approached him before the service, introducing herself as Richard's sponsor from Alcoholics Anonymous. 15 years, she told Thomas, her grip surprisingly strong as she shook his hand. He never missed a meeting, even when he was sick. Helped a lot of newcomers find their way. Thomas nodded, unsure how to reconcile this information with the father he had known. Thank you for coming, he said automatically. He talked about you all the time, the woman continued. Kept your picture in his wallet. Said his greatest regret was not being the father you deserved. Before Thomas could respond, the funeral director signaled that it was time to begin. He made his way to the front pew where Eleanor, Abigail, and Ryan were already seated. The priest, Father Michael, had apparently known Richard well and spoke about redemption and second chances with such specificity that Thomas wondered how much his father had shared in confession. After the service, the family stood in a receiving line as mourners offered condolences. Person after person approached with stories about Richard, how he had helped them stay sober, how he volunteered at the homeless shelter every Christmas, how he taught chess to kids at the community center. I had no idea, Thomas murmured to Eleanor as they drove to the cemetery for the graveside service. It's like they're talking about a completely different person. People can change, Eleanor said, squeezing his hand, even when we've given up on them. The burial was brief, the November wind whipping around them as the priest said final prayers. Thomas had opted for a simple headstone that would read, Richard Mitchell, beloved father and grandfather. As the family turned to leave, Father Michael approached with an envelope. Richard asked me to give you this after the service, he said, handing it to Thomas. He wrote it a few months ago when he first got his diagnosis. Thomas tucked the envelope into his suit pocket, unable to face another revelation in that moment. Later, when they returned home and the flood of casseroles from neighbors had been organized in the refrigerator, he retreated to his study to read his father's final words. The letter was handwritten, the script shaky but legible. Tommy, if you're reading this, then you came to say goodbye, and for that alone, I am grateful beyond words. There's so much I want to tell you, but I've learned that actions speak louder than all the apologies in the world, so I'll keep this brief. I failed you in every way a father can fail a son. I can't undo that damage. I can only hope that in your life, you found the strength I never had. From what I've seen, and yes, I've watched from a distance all these years, you've become an extraordinary man, husband, and father. None of that is because of me. It's in spite of me, and that may be my only real accomplishment in this life. I've tried to make arrangements for Abigail and Ryan. It's not much, but it's honest money, earned during my sober years. Please don't deny them this gift out of anger toward me. They deserve a grandfather who contributed something good to their lives, even if it comes too late. There's one last thing. In the safety deposit box, key enclosed, you'll find the deed to a cabin in the Berkshires. Your mother and I bought it the year before you were born. It was our dream to retire there someday. After she died, I couldn't bear to sell it, so I rented it out all these years, using the income for your children's education fund. The cabin itself is yours now. Do with it what you will. Sell it, use it, burn it to the ground. It's the only thing of value I have left to give you. I die with no expectation of forgiveness, only gratitude that you and your beautiful family exist in this world. In the end, that's enough. Dad Thomas sat for a long time after reading the letter, the key to the safety deposit box heavy in his palm. The strange thing was, he felt no anger as he read his father's words, only a profound sadness for all that had been lost, all the years wasted in bitterness and estrangement. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Ryan stood in the doorway, still in his funeral suit though he'd loosened the tie. "You okay, Dad?" he asked. Thomas gestured for his son to come in. "Just reading Grandpa's letter." Ryan sat in the leather chair across from the desk. "Anything important?" Thomas considered the question. "He left us a cabin in Massachusetts. Apparently, he's owned it since before I was born." "Really?" Ryan leaned forward, interested. "What kind of cabin?" "I have no idea," Thomas admitted. "I never knew it existed." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Maybe we could check it out this weekend? All of us." Thomas looked at his son, this young man on the cusp of adulthood, so eager to understand his family's complicated history. "You don't have to do this for me, Ryan. It's okay if you want to get back to normal life. College applications, soccer practice. I'm not doing it for you," Ryan said simply. "I'm doing it for me. For all of us. Grandpa was part of our family, even when he wasn't around. I want to understand who he was." Thomas felt something shift inside him, a loosening of the tight control he'd maintained for so long. "All right," he said. "We'll go this weekend." The cabin turned out to be a substantial two-story structure on 3 acres of wooded land, overlooking a small lake. Thomas used the key from the safety deposit box to unlock the front door, pushing it open to reveal a great room with exposed beams and a massive stone fireplace. The furnishings were simple but well-maintained. A comfortable-looking sofa, a dining table that could seat 8, bookshelves built into the walls. "This is amazing," Abigail said, moving to the windows that faced the water. "How could you not know about this place, Dad?" Thomas shook his head, equally mystified. "Your grandmother never mentioned it. Maybe it was too painful for her after he left." They explored the cabin together, finding 3 bedrooms upstairs, each with handmade quilts on the beds. In what was clearly the master bedroom, Thomas discovered a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were photo albums, dozens of them, chronicling his parents' early years together and his own childhood up until age 12. "Look at this," Eleanor called from a small office off the main room. The family gathered around her as she pointed to a wall covered in framed photographs. Thomas graduating from UConn, Eleanor and Thomas on their wedding day, Abigail as a toddler on a swing, Ryan in his first soccer uniform. More recent photos showed Abigail's high school graduation and Ryan holding a debate trophy. "He's been keeping track of us all along," Abigail said softly, "even when we didn't know it." Thomas stared at the wall of photos, a timeline of the life his father had observed from a distance. "I don't understand why he never reached out. If he cared enough to collect all these, why stay away?" "Maybe he thought he didn't deserve to be in our lives," Ryan suggested. "Or maybe he was afraid you'd reject him. Or both," Eleanor added gently. They continued exploring, finding the kitchen well-stocked with basics, the refrigerator recently filled with fresh food. A note on the counter from Margaret explained that she was the caretaker who had been maintaining the property for years, and that she'd prepared the cabin as requested by Mr. Mitchell in case the family decided to visit. In the den, they discovered a chessboard set up on a small table by the window, the pieces positioned mid-game. An envelope propped against the white king bore Ryan's name. Inside was a note explaining that this was the final game Richard had been playing against himself, and that he hoped someday Ryan might finish it for him. By evening, they had settled into the cabin, building a fire in the great room and ordering pizza from the only delivery place in the nearby town. As they sat around the fire, Thomas found himself sharing stories about his childhood, fishing trips with his father, Sunday morning pancakes, the model airplane they'd spent a winter building together. "Those are good memories," Abigail observed. Thomas nodded. "Yes, they are." He gazed into the fire, watching the flames dance. "I spent so many years focusing on how he hurt us that I forgot the good parts. Or maybe I just couldn't bear to remember them." "People aren't all good or all bad," Ryan said, echoing Barbara's words from days earlier. "Even the best people make mistakes. And the worst people sometimes do good things." Thomas looked at his son with newfound respect. "When did you get so wise?" Ryan shrugged. "Must be genetic." Later, after Abigail and Ryan had gone to bed, Thomas and Eleanor sat on the porch swing, wrapped in blankets against the night chill. The moon cast a silver path across the lake's surface. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked, her head resting against his shoulder. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I'm thinking about legacy. What we pass on to our children, intentionally or not." "Your father's legacy isn't just his mistakes," Eleanor said. "It's also this place. Those photo albums. The college fund. The man who helped others stay sober. And my legacy?" Thomas wondered aloud. "Will Ryan and Abigail remember me for my strengths or my flaws? For the vacations and ball games? Or for my controlling nature, my rigidity about money, my inability to forgive?" Eleanor straightened to look at him directly. "They'll remember that you were always there. That you never walked away, even when things were difficult. That you loved them fiercely and imperfectly, as all parents do." Thomas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I've spent my whole adult life trying not to be my father. But maybe in some ways, I need to be more like him. The man he became, not the man who left us." "What do you mean?" He found a way to make peace with his past, to help others, to contribute something positive to the world, even after causing so much pain. Thomas took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I've been holding on to my anger for so long. I'm not sure who I am without it." "You're the man I fell in love with," Eleanor said simply. "The man who taught our children about integrity and perseverance. The man sitting beside me now, brave enough to question his own heart." Inside the cabin, a floorboard creaked. Thomas and Eleanor turned to see Abigail in the doorway, wrapped in a quilt. "Sorry," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Join us," Eleanor invited, making room on the swing. Abigail settled beside them, leaning her head against her father's other shoulder. "I've been reading more of Grandpa's journal," she said. "There's an entry from just a few months ago. He wrote that his greatest hope was that his mistakes might serve as a warning rather than a legacy. That by showing what happens when you run from your problems instead of facing them, he might help future generations of Mitchells make better choices." Thomas absorbed this, feeling the weight of his father's self-awareness. He achieved that much, at least. They sat in companionable silence, watching the moon's reflection ripple on the lake. After a while, Ryan appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Room for one more?" he asked. Somehow, they made space. The family pressed together on the swing meant for two. Thomas felt the solid presence of his son beside him, his daughter's head on his shoulder, his wife's hand in his. In that moment, surrounded by the family he and Eleanor had built together, he finally understood what his father had meant in his letter, that this, simply this, was enough. The next morning, Thomas woke early and slipped out to the porch with a cup of coffee. The sun was just rising over the lake, burning away the morning mist. He sat in quiet contemplation until he heard the door open behind him. "Morning, Dad," Ryan said, joining him with his own steaming mug. "Sleep well?" Thomas asked. Ryan nodded. "Better than I have in weeks, actually." They watched a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface, leaving twin trails in their wake. "I've been thinking," Thomas said finally. "What if we kept this place? Made it a family retreat? Somewhere we could all come together, even when life gets busy." Ryan's face brightened. "That would be amazing. I could bring friends up during college breaks. Abby could study for the bar exam here. It would need some updating, Thomas mused. New appliances, maybe solar panels for sustainability. We could do the work ourselves, Ryan suggested. Make it a family project. Thomas smiled at his son's enthusiasm. Your grandfather would have liked that idea. This place meant something to him. And now it means something to us, Ryan said. A different kind of inheritance than he probably imagined. Thomas thought about the complicated legacy his father had left, the pain and the gifts, the absence and the unexpected presence. Perhaps this cabin was a metaphor for their relationship, something beautiful hidden away, neglected for years but still standing, waiting to be rediscovered and renewed. Want to try fishing later? Thomas asked. I saw rods in the shed. I'd like that, Ryan said. Maybe you could teach me what Grandpa taught you. Thomas felt a circle completing, a wound beginning to heal. I'd be honored, he said, and meant it.